Welcome to this week's On the Fly. I'm your host, Gene DeFilippo, and our guest this week is the very successful Director of Athletics at Oklahoma State University, Chad Weiberg. Chad, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. Hey, there'll be a lot of young administrators out there listening. Talk about your story. Moving to Stillwater when you were, I think, in junior high,
Yeah.
and then take us up to the present day.
Okay. Well, I'll try to be as brief as I can. But yeah, my dad was a basketball coach. Most of his career was in junior college, at the junior college level. But he did get hired as an assistant coach here at Oklahoma State under Paul Hansen. And so we moved here when I was in junior high, going into junior high. And that really was, Gene, sort of my first exposure to big time college athletics. Now, you got to remember that this was in the mid '80s, right? And so things were different then than they are now, and certainly there was no internet and things like that. So just as a young kid, for me, the exposure to that kind of thing wasn't as easy as it is now. So it was really enlightening getting here and seeing 45,000 people at the football game or whatever. And, seeing at the time, Gallagher Hall was, I think, just a little under 7,000 seats, but, that was big time. And
Hey, you know what? Just for a minute, that was one tough place to play, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was awesome. Yeah.
Eddie Sutton used to talk about the old arena and how tough it was for people to come in and play there.
I remember, when I first got here, it still had the old wooden seats, the fold down wooden seats in it. And yeah, very, very historic. And it's been through a couple of renovations and obviously an expansion since then, and it's still great. But yeah, the old Gallagher Hall was really, really special. And so yeah, that was sort of my first exposure to it. Probably is what got me thinking about, maybe this would be something that I'd want to get into. I loved sports. The only unfortunate thing for me is I wasn't talented enough to play it, certainly not at this level, and so I figured out if I was going to be involved, I'd have to find another way to be involved with it than playing it. And so, he was here for a couple of years, and then we moved away. I did high school in a town about an hour north of Stillwater, and but then came back to school here and started. I say all the time that I started out as an unpaid intern in the athletic department. That was my junior year, and I just did whatever they would let me do, whatever they needed to be done, and then at the end of my junior year, they asked if I would want to come back and do the internship again my senior year, and I said yes, I'd love to. And they said, well, we'll pay you next year if you do. Of course, it was minimum wage, but I thought that was the best thing ever. I thought, and so that allowed me to quit the other job I was working for money, and allowed me to spend more time in the athletic department. And just, Gene, as you know, just was fortunate to be around some really, really great people, and that invested in me and helped me learn. And I just tried to soak it all in as much as I could. And that's really where I got started. It's kind of one of those full circle stories. Dave Martin was the deputy AD. I don't think that's what we called it at the time, but that was the role that he was in. And there was a position that was open about the time I was graduating from school. I didn't think I had any kind of shot at that job because the person that had been in it before had a lot of experience, and I didn't think they were looking for an entry level type person. And so I was applying for jobs all over the country at other places at entry level type roles. But I ran into Dave Martin literally in the arena one day, and he said, I'll never forget, he said, Weiberg, are you going to apply for that job or what? And I knew the answer he was looking for, even if it wasn't the truth. And I said, absolutely. And So I applied for it and ended up getting it. And then what's crazy, Gene, is, I work here for 9 years and I leave for 13 years at K-State and Texas Tech, and then have the opportunity to come home as the deputy AD. And that opportunity was because Dave Martin was retiring. And so it just really kind of came full circle in that way, which is pretty incredible and pretty fortunate for me.
You've done a great job there. Everybody's interested in the Big 12, and the only thing that's constant in college athletics today is change. Uh, it's
Yeah.
certainly it's certainly it's not what you and I signed up for, but whether we like it or not, we have to accept it and we have to move on. But talk about the Big 12 when you lost a couple of people and then you got them back. It's a great story.
Yeah, yeah. So, this was, I started July 1st of 2021, and I think it was on July 21st. So 21 days into me being in the position, we it leaked out, right? So you have to remember, it really wasn't announced per se, but it started leaking out that OU and Texas were leaving to go to the SEC. And so I immediately basically moved my office to our campus administration building, because I was spending pretty much every hour of the day with our president, who was also new at the time. And so, one of the great things about it was I got to spend a lot of time with my president. I said, probably in the first 3 months, I got to spend more time with my president than some new ADs probably get to spend with their president in the first 3 years. So that was a silver lining, I guess, to it all. But and she was great support through it as well. But certainly, yes, something that you don't think that you're going to be dealing with 21 days into your tenure. I kind of had my 100-day plan, like I think a lot of people do, and 21 days into it, that goes out the window, and you're dealing with things that are completely different than you expected. And that was, just be real, that was a big blow to the Big 12. I mean, that's two of the biggest brands, obviously, in college sports and in the Big 12. And there was a lot of narrative at the time around, what does this mean for the remaining members? The media, there's speculation that the media value could be cut in half at least. And obviously, if that were to have been the case, that would be devastating for all the remaining members. There was all the rumors about, the remaining members going to other conferences, whether it's the Big Ten or the Pac-12 or whatever, it was at the time. And I can remember, I'd wake up every morning and look at the latest rumors, and of course, you don't know which ones are true or not until one morning I woke up and the rumors were about us going somewhere. And I knew that we'd had no conversations with that, about that. And so, obviously it was just a lot of rumors and conjecture, but there was, Gene, just a lot of uncertainty, and everybody, my job is to do what's best for Oklahoma State University first and foremost. And yes, we're a proud member of the Big 12 conference, but first and foremost, it's to do what's right for Oklahoma State University. So I think everyone was in the same boat at their institutions at that time, trying to figure out what was best. I give a lot of credit to Bob Bowlesby, our commissioner at the time. It was obviously a shock to him as well, but he did provide stabilization in the form of, we quickly regrouped and went out and got, the four, what we felt were the best available, members to bring into the Big 12 conference at the time. And so that, I think, certainly helped stabilize everything. I think that those were good members to bring in. And then obviously we had the transition to Brett Yormark, Commissioner Yormark, after Bob retired, and he, then started the process of trying to reposition our negotiation time frame, our window. So he bumped up our window with ESPN and Fox, got kind of out in front of that, and was able to negotiate a what at the time I think everybody thought was a good deal, because it it wasn't a big increase over what we had, like the SEC and the Big Ten were seeing, but it wasn't a decrease. It wasn't a 50% cut like was being projected. So it certainly stabilized. And then, more importantly, as it played out, what it did is put us in a position then, obviously, to take on what's referred to as the four corner schools out of the Pac-12 when all of that started happening and they became available. And so that set us up to be the 16 schools that we are now. And I feel like we're in a really good position.
There's some real positives to the league in that you have a school or schools in all three time zones.
Yes.
You've got two different networks that you're working with. You've got now some teams out east where you're picking up, a big fan base.
Mm-hmm.
It's a heck of a league right now, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And that's exactly right. I mean, we span across all the time zones now. And that positions some pretty good windows with us. As you said, we're partners with both ESPN and Fox. So I think that gives us a lot of, there's a lot of good that comes with that as well in terms of some of the windows. It's a very competitive league, as you've already seen this year. Anything can happen on any given Saturday, and some of the teams that were picked at the bottom preseason are undefeated at the top, and vice versa. And so I think it's a compelling product to watch, if you will, on TV. So I think that the ratings hopefully will continue to grow, and that will position us. A lot of what Commissioner Yormark is doing is trying to position us for the next round of negotiations. So we'll enter into the market in 2030 into negotiations. Our current deal is up in 2031. And just hopefully we can be positioned in a really strong place to, increase the value of the league and try to keep pace. And if not, close the gap a little bit with the SEC and the Big Ten, who are obviously way out there right now.
Yeah. Chad, the Weiberg family is synonymous with Oklahoma State. Your dad was an assistant coach there. You're the director of athletics there. Your brother went to school there as well and was a manager on the basketball team. You want to talk about that horrific night on return from a basketball game?
Yeah. So my brother Jared was, probably a little more talented athletically than I was, but not overly gifted. He was a really, really hard worker and a great competitor. But he ultimately, his goal was he wanted to coach. He wanted to kind of follow our dad's footsteps and be a basketball coach. And he played for my dad, but then transferred here to Oklahoma State and walked on initially his junior year, and got a great experience as a walk-on here at Oklahoma State. And then his senior year, he transitioned into more of the manager or student assistant role, because really what he wanted to do was learn how to coach, scout teams and all of those things. And of course, there was no one better than Coach Sutton to sort of be part of that tree. And so I think he was doing all the right things to set up his career and was doing what he loved. And so we had a game, obviously, at the University of Colorado. As fate would have it, or God thing, whatever you want to call it, I was actually in San Antonio that weekend for an alumni conference. And then I had gone to watch the game with the local chapter, the OSU alumni chapter there in San Antonio. And then I had gone out to UTSA because my other brother, Jared was the youngest, and then I'm the oldest in the middle. My brother Brett was an assistant coach at the University of Texas, San Antonio, and they had a game that night. And so we were at that game, and it wasn't until after the game was over, my brother went back into obviously the locker room for the post game, and then his office, and had a message in his office from my dad, saying that they'd lost a plane on the return trip, and we hadn't heard from Jared. And so, it was obviously just a tragic thing for all 10 families and 10 people in the OSU family involved with that. I'm so thankful. I think that Brett and I were able to be together that night, as, like I said, God would have it, or fate would have it. And then, obviously the number one goal at that point was just to get home as quick as we could, get to my parents. And but Gene, like I said, he was doing what he loved. He was doing all the right things. I have no doubt that he would be, a really good basketball coach somewhere right now. I always wonder what kind of family he would have, and those kinds of things. So we miss him, but the OSU family was incredible around all of that. And President Halligan at the time said that we will remember, and that was his promise, is that we will remember. And I can remember hearing that, and I didn't really have any context or know what that really meant at the time, but it's pretty incredible. I mean, here we are 23 years later, and every year the university remembers, has that celebration of those 10 guys around that time of the year, during basketball season. And then there's also in the spring, they do a memorial run, and the proceeds from that around our spring game, that kind of thing. But proceeds of that go to benefit the counseling services here at OSU, which obviously were an important part of that event and that time. But it's pretty incredible because there's 18 to 22-year-olds right on this campus right now, and I'll be walking across campus and I'll see T-shirts, about remembering the 10, and you realize that the kid wearing that shirt wasn't even born when this happened, right? And so the institution, just the family, the OSU family, has done a remarkable job of kind of continuing their memory and their legacy, and living out what President Halligan promised, and that we would remember. So I think that just speaks to what this place is about. I mean, that really is. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of places talk about being families, and they are. Unfortunately, Oklahoma State has had, has had multiple opportunities to kind of live out what that really, really means, and this was one of them, and it certainly was a family. I mean, I know that my family felt that coming around us and that support, and so it's I think it's a pretty stark example of what that means, what this place is about.
Chad, explain why there were only 10 people on the plane and what you were doing. A lot of people think, well, you just charter a plane, everybody gets on the plane. This was different, wasn't it?
It was different. And, you got to remember, too, that this was, several years ago. That's certainly how we do it now, obviously. But at least at Oklahoma State at that time, they used donor planes a lot of times to transport the team. And so in this case, I think there were 3 different planes that were used to get the team to Colorado and back. And obviously 2 of the 3 planes made it just fine, and one of them didn't. So that was just how it was done, at least here. Now, clearly that has all changed. Clearly that, at least here at Oklahoma State, was a big part of that changing. I know a lot of it was just, I'm guessing I wasn't in the thick of it at the time, but it was just budget, right, reasons, and trying to save money and put money in other places. And so if you could have donors help get the team around, that saved, travel money. And but not, clearly now, that's just a priority. I mean, we don't. It's one of the first things that we budget. We're going to budget for safety of our student athletes and our teams above all else, whatever that looks like or whatever that needs to look like. That's what we're going to do. But just it was very different at the time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Chad. I know a lot of our listeners don't remember that, but that was a real, real tragedy that we all came to be Oklahoma State fans, and our prayers were with you.
Yeah.
Let's
One
talk about some. Oh, excuse me. Go ahead.
real quick, Gene. I mean, we're not the only ones that have experienced tragedies similar to that. And I can remember that. I had total strangers, from Wichita State and Marshall, that reached out to me that had lost loved ones, a lot of cases, maybe brothers, in those tragedies. And I can, remember being very grateful that those people, did reach out at the time and sort of had that unfortunate, kind of bond or unfortunate shared experience there. But it really meant a lot to me to get to talk to some of those people or hear from some of those people that had experienced something similar. So, and I've always tried, and I've learned from that, and I try to do similar things when others experience that kind of thing as well.
Great. Uh, let's get into Oklahoma State. How
Yeah.
about our football team this year, and what are the outlook for basketball and some of the other sports? You've got a tremendous tradition the last 20 years in football. It's been terrific.
Yes, it has. And, so what a lot of people don't realize about Oklahoma State in general, Gene, is we've got 53 NCAA national championships. So
Wow.
there's only 5 schools in the entire country that have more national championships than that. And so we've had a strong, athletic tradition across the board. And but probably one of the reasons, honestly, that more people don't know that is we didn't have a real strong football program for a number of years. And I often say it was just because I don't think we were intentional and that serious about investing in that program the way that we needed to. And I'm not casting any blame or anything. I don't know what all the reasons were for that at the time, but it just takes a lot, right? In that sport, particular, if you're going to be successful in it, you have to really invest in it. I just don't know that we had the resources. It felt like we had the resources to do that, but that is the sport that shines the spotlight the brightest, right? And so fast forward to about 20 years ago and Coach Gundy taking over, obviously Coach Holder and his relationship with Boone Pickens and getting Boone to invest in the program like he did was a game changer, right? All of those things kind of coming together at the right time, investing in the program, gave us the ability to get serious about competing in football. And Coach Gundy has done a great job with that. And so entering into this season, I believe since 2010, we would be in the top 10 in the number of wins in college football. And the other 9 on that list are exactly who you would think you would see on that list, right? It's Georgia, it's Alabama, it's Ohio State, it's Notre Dame, it's Oklahoma. It's all the blue bloods of college football. And then there's Oklahoma State. And I think that just is a great testament, shows what Coach Gundy has done here over that period of time. And that has helped, obviously, in all the ways that it helps, right? I mean, we've sold out our football stadium, and so the revenue that generates helps keep us, competitive not only in football but all of our other sports. Helps shine the spotlight on all the successes that we're having here at Oklahoma State. I think we finished in the top 25 in the Learfield Directors Cup the last four years. We were 19th this year. So we really are blessed with great coaches, great people, having a lot of success. But it is really football success that drives that and then helps shine the spotlight on all of the rest of it. And Coach Kennedy's done a really good job.
Expansion has been good for a lot of schools, Chad, but there are some disadvantages too. And Bedlam is not going to take place this year, and I don't know about the future. So, talk to us about Bedlam and what a loss it is for all of us that love college football.
Yeah, that is one of the byproducts of a lot of this, conference realignment. Obviously, there's lots of examples. Texas and Texas A&M didn't, play for a number of years until they're now back in the same conference. So, and I think that's a little bit of it, Gene, is things will, I think, continue to evolve and shift. But for the present moment, as far as Bedlam is concerned, and I think what you're talking about is Bedlam football.
Yes, yes.
Because we will continue Bedlam in most all the other sports. It's going to look different than it does before. So, for example, we'll play a midweek game against OU in baseball instead of the conference weekend series. We'll do something similar, I think, in softball. We're going to play a neutral site game at the Paycom Center, the home of the Oklahoma City Thunder, in Oklahoma City in basketball. So I know that is something that OSU and OU fans both will look forward to. So we'll continue to play. And I have not said that we will never play Bedlam football again either. The reality of it is that when all of this happened, we were scheduled out, and at least in our non-conference scheduling. And I know it's a little bit different for them in the SEC because they only, at least currently, they're playing 8 conference games and so have 4 non-conference slots. But we still have the three non-conference slots, and we have those full for the foreseeable future, at least for sure with our Power 5 opponents. So as an example, we started a series this year with Arkansas, University of Arkansas. We haven't played that game since I think the early 80s. So that was a big deal for us and our fans. They're the second closest Power 5 school other than just than OU down the road. And so I think it has the opportunity to be a great regional rivalry that we haven't played in a long time. So I'm excited to get that going. We go to the University of Oregon next year, and they return the game the following year here in Stillwater. So I know our fans are excited about having the Ducks here. We've got the Crimson Tide coming into Stillwater, and we'll go to Tuscaloosa. We've got a series with our old counterparts, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, coming up. So those are all, non-conference games that we had scheduled. We're excited about. Our fans, I think, are excited about those. And so we just weren't in a position where we were going to start trying to make changes just to keep Bedlam going. I mean, our position on it was we had Bedlam on the schedule, and it wasn't our decision that Bedlam, was no longer on the schedule, and so we weren't going to start trying to adjust things just to get Bedlam on the schedule. Now, at some point, we will start having those conversations about what that looks like down the road when we do have the openings. And so I'm not going to sit here and say we're never going to play OU in football, because never is a long, long time. And it's just simply just the logistics of it, the scheduling logistics of it that's keeping it from happening at this moment.
A lot of I spent 13 years in the Southeastern Conference, and a lot of the SEC teams have rivals that they play at the end of the year that are not conference rivals.
Yep.
Georgia plays Georgia Tech.
Florida and Florida State.
Right. Florida State. Clemson plays South Carolina. You can go, Kentucky plays Louisville. You can go on and on. So, once the scheduling gets worked out, it might be that the final game of the year might be Oklahoma State and Oklahoma. And, that would be in line with what a lot of the SEC schools are doing anyway. So we'll have to see how that works in the future.
Yeah.
Chad, you're as up to date as anyone on the 2 proposals that are out there about, bidding to the networks, either 70 teams altogether or 130 teams altogether. What are your thoughts on the proposals?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm as up to date as anyone, Gene. I've read a lot of things and obviously talked to some of my counterparts about it. But here's the part of it that obviously you can get down in the weeds, and devil's always in the details, right? And would be so many details that would have to be worked out for either one of those proposals to go through. And first of all, I really applaud the people who have spent the time and taken the energy to put those plans together and put those plans out there, because I think the one thing that they both is at the core of both of them that resonates with me and with us here at Oklahoma State is, college football is the second most valuable sports property in the country, right? Only behind the NFL. It's greater than the NBA. It's greater than Major League Baseball. It's greater than all the other leagues, except for we're not paid like that. The NBA outpaces us. A lot of the other leagues outpaces us, and I think that's because we go into the market broken off into pieces, and we're not able to fully capitalize on if we were going into the market together. So I think what I appreciate about both of the proposals is what they're trying to do ultimately is get us out into the market together and try to capture the full value of what we offer. And I think every athletic, I don't think in either proposal they're asking for anyone to take a step back from where they are. I think this is a net gain for everyone involved. And I think that's a good thing. And I think everybody should be interested in trying to capture the full value. And every university president, because there's a lot of pressure being put on institutions right now with revenue sharing coming on board and all of those things. So I think presidents should be very interested in us being able to capture the full value of what we bring to the table. And so, like I said, there's a lot of details that will need to be worked out to do that. Who ends up doing it, what it ends up looking like, and all of those things, I think, are things that we can figure out. But the main thing is we've got to get into a place where we can kind of go into the market together to capture the full value. And then I think if we can go into the market and capture the full value as one, what that does potentially is give us the ability to start to get back into what makes sense here in terms of geographic rivalries and not having to travel all over the country to do these things. And so I think that there'll be a lot of benefits that come from us, again, being able to go into the market as one entity and then how that trickles down. So I'm very interested in seeing where that goes, and supportive of it from that kind of high level aspect of it, because I think that is what we need to do. That's what's going to be best for all of our athletic departments and all of our institutions.
Yeah, well said. Last question here, Chad. How is the House agreement going to affect Oklahoma State?
Well, obviously, financially, it's something that we have to figure out because, I think we're like most, if not all places, right? We don't end the year with $20 million sitting around that we haven't, spent. And yet that's what, is possible with the House settlement is that we, can share revenue up to 20 some $million, right? Whatever that ends up being. And so the first question is, where does that come from? Right. And what are the changes that we need to make in order to try to get there? And that puts a lot of pressure on a lot of places, right? It puts pressure on the athletic departments and all of the other programs about how we're spending money. It puts pressure on our donors because we're going to be asking them to help even more than they already are for us to get there. And I think it ultimately puts pressure on a lot of the institutions, right? Can they help get the athletic departments where they need to be? So there's the financial piece of it. And then I think what sometimes gets lost, and I think is almost as big a deal, but kind of gets overshadowed by the revenue sharing part of it, but is the roster limits, right? And, we carry, as an example, about 140 football players on our roster. I think a lot of schools are in the 125, 130, somewhere, at least in there. And, the settlement calls for a roster cap of 105. So, in our case, and in every school's case, there's going to be a significant number of student athletes that are currently on our campus and as part of our football program, just football, speaking of football, that aren't going to be able to be there once the settlement is enacted. And so where do they go? How does that look? What's that trickle effect that happens there? And I think it will be similar in other sports as well. So those are all the things that we're talking about and thinking through and trying to kind of figure out. And of course, everybody wants answers, but none of us have all of the answers right now because partly, she's preliminarily approved the settlement, but it hasn't been fully approved yet. So we don't know exactly for sure what it's going to look like. So we just have to continue to scenario plan for the eventualities or in case or, all of those things, try to keep as much flexibility and optionality as we can. But also at the same time, as you started out saying, we have to continue to adapt and continue to change or you're going to get left behind.
All right. It still has, we still need to have more answers. How does this affect Title IX?
Yes.
That's one of the things. Roster management. Some of the schools are concerned that the Ohio States and the Michigans and the Texases and Oklahomas now, instead of 85 scholarships, will go to 105. And, that really has an effect on the parity in college football. So there's a lot of things that we don't know about at this time. And hopefully, as you've said, the devil's in the details, but hopefully we can get these details worked out pretty soon.
Yep, absolutely. And there's always unintended consequences, right, Gene, of anything you do. And those are sometimes the hardest to see around the corner what those are. And but I think we all are aware that there's going to be those, even though we don't know what all of them are. They'll be out there, and so time will tell what were the unintended consequences of this. And the final piece of it is this isn't the final answer either. I think that's the other thing is there's still other lawsuits out there. There's still the NLRB, cases. There's still all of these other things that are happening. So, where does it, how do those things impact us into the future? Those are all unknown things that we'll have to get ready to adapt to as well.
Well, we're out of time on this week's On the Fly. I'm your host, Gene DeFilippo, and I want to thank Chad Weiberg, the very successful director of athletics at Oklahoma State University, for being our guest. Chad, thank you for being here. And to all of our listeners out there, thanks for your time this time, and we'll see you next time.